is truly a nation in mourning.
A nation in mourning again and again. Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook.
Emily Parker, age 6.
Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad.
From schools to nightclubs, the number of mass shootings and casualties associated with them are on the rise. 2 of the 5 deadliest mass shootings in modern U.S. history, Sutherland Springs, Texas, and Las Vegas, Nevada, occurred in just the past 2 months.
What the hell? What is that?
It's largely an American phenomenon. We Americans are 4.4% of the world's population, and we own 42% of the world's guns. We have about 270 million of them, nearly 1 for every adult. But every adult does not have one. According to the Pew Research Center, 42% of all households in America have 1 or more guns. The numbers change depending on where you live and how you vote. Go to rural America, 59% of homes have guns. In the suburbs, it's 41% of homes. And in the cities, you'll find a gun in 29% of homes. The numbers also show a divide between political parties. 56% of Republican households have guns, compared to 36% of Democratic households. But what do all of these numbers tell us? And how do we stop mass shootings? Are more gun laws the answer?
In Chicago, which has the toughest gun laws in the United States, probably you could say by far, they have more gun violence than any other city.
Would more background checks and a larger number of restricted persons help curb the violence?
It seems like a no-brainer. If you're under the watchful eye of a federal law enforcement agency, you should not be able to purchase a firearm.
Do the kinds of guns available make a difference? What about enhancements like bump stocks used by the Las Vegas shooter to make his guns more deadly?
What the NRA has said is we ought to take a look at that, see if it's in compliance with federal law, and it's worthy of additional regulation. That being said, we didn't say ban, we didn't say confiscate.
Or is all of the attention on guns misplaced?
That is not looking seriously at mental health, looking seriously at violent games, looking seriously at violent movies.
And we've all sadly seen these tragedies occur, and people get upset for a short period of time, and then absolutely nothing changes. We're glad you're with us for this Fox 13 News special report, Guns in America. Today we have 4 experts on different sides talking about mass shootings, the Second Amendment, and the relationship we Americans have with guns. So we're going to start with 2 of those experts. We have with us Brian King, representative from Salt Lake City, the minority leader in the State House of Representatives, and Paul Ray, a representative from Davis County and a Republican, here to talk about this issue. You know, this has been quite a time in modern American history where we've seen these mass shootings. So let's start right there. Mass shootings, are guns the problem?
Well, I would say about that, Max, that guns per se obviously don't kill people. People using guns kill people. But when you have as many guns as we have in the United States of America, you're going to naturally have a much higher rate of homicide and suicide and casualties from guns than you do in other countries. And that's the problem. We need to more effectively come up with ways of dealing with the reality that we have far more guns in the United States than any other country in the world. All right. And Paul Ray.
You know, I think we need to look at the underlying cause of what we're seeing, because if you look at some other countries that have restrictive gun policies or ban them outright, you're seeing vehicles used, you're seeing knives used, you're seeing bombs used. So people that are intent on harming people are going to use what's available to them, and here it's guns. But the underlying thing is not, the guns are not the problem, the cars are not the problem is the mental illness. And we need to, I think, focus better and do a better job of taking care of the underlying cause.
How do you respond to that, Representative King?
Well, there are some folks that are mentally ill, there's no doubt about it. But there are others that just, you can't detect that they're mentally ill before they do it. For example, this guy down in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. I don't know that anyone had any warning that he was going to do what he did because he had not been diagnosed with anything. Now, it turns out that he did have a history of abusing his live-in girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a connection between a history of domestic violence and gun use that we can find some common ground with Second Amendment folks, I think, to reduce the likelihood that those who have got a history of domestic violence are going to go out and use a gun to injure people.
One thing in common from both Las Vegas and Sutherland Springs, Texas, is the fact that the shooters used what we call assault weapons. And there's a proposal in the U.S. Congress from Senator Dianne Feinstein from California to ban what are considered assault weapons. And we want to show you what that would mean if that proposal were to go into effect. And so take a look at this. The proposed ban would be rifles with specialized grips and stocks, with grenade launchers or rocket launchers, or fixed magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, also pistols with similar features, and shotguns that hold more than 5 rounds. Also, it would ban any kind of other magazine that holds more than 10 rounds. Paul Ray, is that reasonable? I mean, there were assault weapons used in both of these shootings.
Well, I think what you have to look at, I mean, they're talking about banning large clips. Well, you just carry multiple clips. So those types of actions, it sounds good and it feels good, but I think it gives you a false sense of security. You know, all these shooters have multiple clips.
That you're pausing, you're giving someone a chance to take some action, isn't that?
What, 1 to 2 seconds, and how many people really are able to take actions? The Las Vegas shooter, he was up high. There was no way, it didn't matter how big his clips were, you weren't able to take action on him because he was not in a range where you could actually, even with another gun, there wasn't a range that you could actually take action on this individual. You know, he had planned that out really well. So I think a lot of what we see is just a lot of false sense of security, and the other factor of that is you're going to have law-abiding people that will abide by those, but your bad guys are still going to do it because they're already breaking the law, so do they really care?
Okay, well, we're going to get to a lot more topics, and after the break, we're going to be talking, we're going to bring in Utah's top gun lobbyist, and we're going to bring in the leader of Utah's Episcopal Church. We're going to ask them about the most debated 27 words in the U.S. Constitution, the Second Amendment. Take a look. We'll be right back. The Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome back to Guns in America, a Fox 13 special report. 1 sentence, 27 words, but there's nothing simple about this debate. But we do have two more people to help us in this conversation. Joining us on the panel is Clark Aposhian, the chair of the Utah Shooting Sports Council. Nice to have you with us, Clark. And Bishop Scott Hayashi, who is the bishop of Utah's Episcopal Diocese. A pleasure to have you here, Bishop.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So the Second Amendment, is it absolute, Clark?
Well, absolute. It means what it says. It's the right of the people to keep and bear arms.
Mm-hmm. But you can't keep any kind of arm. I can't buy a bazooka.
And the Supreme Court basically outlines the limitations and that on it. And our most recent one would be the Heller decision, and the decision was written by Justice Antonin Scalia, the late.
And what did that say? Give us a.
Basically, he said it's an individual right, because there's been so much back and forth as to, is it a state right? Is it the right of the militias to have a firearm? Is it the right of the government to own guns? Mm-hmm. No, and it was clearly stated in that decision, 5-4 decision, that it was the individual right of an individual person to own firearms. Now, certainly there are limitations, but one of the key things that Antonin Scalia said was that you're allowed to have a firearm for the dreaded anticipation of a confrontation.
Bishop Hayashi, you are also on the board for the Center for, help me out, Center for the Prevention of Gun Violence? Mm-hmm. Okay, gun violence prevention. What do you say to that? An individual right? I mean, the words well-regulated are right at the beginning of that amendment.
Well, my answer to that question is what Clark has said is absolutely correct. He is correct, and I don't think arguing about the Second Amendment gets us anywhere down the road on actually dealing with trying to limit gun violence. We can argue that all day long about well-regulated militia, but he's actually completely correct on his interpretation as the Supreme Court has ruled. What we don't see there, however, is the fact that certain steps can be taken and still stay within the Second Amendment. So, for instance, you could actually levy huge taxes on the purchase of firearms. You could say, well, for every $100 spent on a firearm, we're going to charge you $500 on top of that. That would not violate the Second Amendment. You could charge $20 a bullet. That does not violate the Second Amendment. But what Clark is saying is absolutely correct, and I would not disagree with him at all with his statement about the Second Amendment of the Constitution from 1791.
Okay, well, coming up, we're going to have a free-for-all. We're going to discuss a lot of things about the gun debate. And to start with, we are going to talk about whether America is a violent country. And as we go to break, here's some information from Duke University. That orange line there, that shows how many Americans die from assaults. The blue line, 23 other advanced economies. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Guns in America, a Fox 13 special report. We're talking with Democratic State Representative from Salt Lake City, Brian King, the minority leader. Representative Paul Ray from Davis County, thanks for being with us. Clark Aposhian, Utah's top gun lobbyist, and the Bishop of Utah's Episcopal Diocese, Scott Hayashi. Thank you all for being here. I want to start again with what we showed you going to break, which is the rate of deaths from violent assault in the United States compared with 23 other nations from the Organization of Economic Development. And you can see the orange line represents the proportion of people in the United States who die per 100,000 from violent assaults each year compared with those other countries. Is America a violent nation? Is that just who we are? Representative King.
When you have the number of guns that we have in America, and you have humans being human beings, these are extraordinarily lethal and easy to use instruments to either kill yourself or other people. Mm-hmm. And so this is a function, I believe, of the number of guns that we have in our society. And the question is, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to just say, well, this is the cost of having living in a free society where the Second Amendment guarantees the right to own guns? It is what it is, and I'll have to put up with it. I don't believe that. I don't think we.
But how many of those violent deaths were actually from guns? That's the question. I think that was just an overall violent death.
And if you look at that orange line, you're talking about the entire United States of America. Okay, but what we're talking about, 13,500 homicides in the United States in 2015. For assault rifles and any rifle of any kind, about 250 of those are attributed to rifles of any kind. The vast majority are handguns, but crime across the United States is not spread evenly across it like so much, Nutella on a piece of toast. It's centered in some very specific areas. In fact, 50% of all the gun homicides are committed in 2% of the counties.
And it's not just homicides, though, Max. The great majority of deaths that result from gun use are suicides.
Indeed.
We need to deal with suicides.
And Representative Ray, you were saying, how many of those are gun deaths? It's true; those are just violent deaths. But earlier in the show, you were saying, hey, if we didn't have guns, we'd use cars. If we didn't have cars, we'd use something else. But we're the nation among all those that have guns, and a lot more people are dying.
Right, but what it goes back to, though, is you have to look at where America started, where it came from. The guns have been since the beginning of time for the United States of America. It's part of our culture. It's part of who we are, what we are. And you just can't go and say, we're going to take those away now. It doesn't work that way. But what we really have to focus on is not as much as what's being used, but what's causing it. What's the cause? And if you look at a lot of those violent crimes, again, underlying domestic violence, mental health, substance abuse. That's the underlying causes for what we're seeing on those crime rates down there, and that's what we have to tackle.
Bishop Hayashi.
I don't think it's an either or. Frankly, I think you're absolutely correct in what you're saying, and I think Representative King is correct in what he's saying. It's a both and. See, the fact of the matter is that with the number of firearms that we have in the United States, 4% of the population, or 42% of the guns. Okay, so when you have that many guns, the chances of them being used are greater just because they're there. If you don't have a gun in your home, the chances of you committing suicide with a gun are basically zero. If your gun is in the home and it's not locked up, the chances of a child grabbing the gun go way up. If the gun isn't there, okay, that doesn't happen. So what I'm saying is that it's not an either or, it's a both and. So I think the gun safety is a very important point, and then addressing why people are violent is also important.
I want to get to that, and that's the mental health issue, because it's big. We've brought it up a couple of times here, and I want to show a couple of things about mental health. So if we can go to that graphic where we're talking about the percentage of Americans who suffer from a serious mental illness. It's 4% of the entire population that suffers from a serious mental illness. Now let's look at how many crimes are committed by people who are mentally ill, the proportion of crimes that are committed by those people. And this is a quote from the Department of Health and Human Services. Only 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to individuals living with a serious mental illness. In fact, those people are 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime. So when we talk about mental health, people with serious mental health issues, they don't commit more crime. They don't commit more violent
overall
crime.
Numbers, when we start talking about 30 to 32 to 33,000 gun deaths per year, we're including the suicides, which account for, at a minimum, 2/3. And unfortunately, in states like Utah, we've got 86% of our gun deaths are suicides, and that's certainly a mental health problem, and that's what we need to be addressing. But you don't fix a mental health problem like suicide the same way you fix a drive-by shooting problem.
Yeah, certainly. But if we're really, if we're actually serious about mental health issues and suicide, you're talking about an extraordinary investment to get to those people, a dramatic societal
Utah
change.
Shooting Sports Council is working with the Suicide Prevention Coordinator, Kim Myers, along with many others, via legislation from Utah's Capitol Hill. And we're working on that, and I think we're the second gun group in the nation to actually address suicide.
We do have in place a suicide prevention study that Kim Myers is working with the Harvard Department of Public Health on to gather information that we can use at the legislature to come up with some good tools to use in that. The thing that worries me about mental health, Max, is it's not right to scapegoat people who have mental health problems or issues and say they're more violent. In fact, they're not more violent. Your graphic showed that they commit violence at no greater rates than people in a general population. So what we need to do is provide greater resources to deal with mental health issues across the board, whether it results in homelessness, whether it results in a suicide risk, whether it results in a homicide risk. Let's have greater resources dealing with mental health issues.
But I think your 4% number is low. That's 4% diagnosed. It's a lot greater. We talk about the Las Vegas shooter, never diagnosed, nobody would ever thought. I think you have a lot. If you look at how bad our substance abuse problem is, that's a bigger indicator, because a lot of people are abused to these substances because they are self-medicating because of depression and other issues that have not been diagnosed.
Well, but we can't diagnose that Las Vegas shooter, unfortunately, because he is gone. So we don't know if he was mentally ill. And the fact is that when you
be mentally unstable, nobody's going to be stable as
when you talk to, and a bishop, I wonder, when you talk to psychologists and other professionals in these fields, it seems like what they're saying is, you know what? The indicators are more personality profiles than they are actual illness.
That's correct. And again, to Brian King's point, I think that the mentally ill are being unfairly scapegoated in this whole conversation. And I think, again, what we ought to be doing is looking at the availability of guns, the easy access to them, but also, again, how much are we investing in the people? You see, in my opinion, frankly, is if we really want to stop gun violence, then we ought to be investing as much as we can in the people themselves. Because
what does that mean? What people?
To all people. Okay, because right now the inequality between the ultra rich and everybody else is growing. If this tax proposal goes through, it's going to get even worse. Okay, if the corporations with all of the keep more money, they're not raising the wages of the people. And
so you're talking about a general societal resentment.
That's right, because you see, when we talk about what causes violence, we're talking about stress, we're talking about substance abuse, we're talking about just anxiety over life itself, we're talking about impulsive behavior, and those things indicate to me a population of people that are severely unhappy, and we're not putting the money where it needs to go to raise up the standard of living, raise up the educational level, so people have the belief and the power to have agency to do things in life.
So after the break, I'm going to ask each of you, what is the thing that we should have said here today that we didn't? And I need a sentence from you that says that. And so we're going to go straight to break, and after that you're going to hear from each of these experts what they think needs to be said about this debate. Well, we're glad you're back with us for this Fox 13 special report, Guns in America. Okay, so our esteemed panel, I'm going to start with Bishop Hayashi of the Episcopal Church. What did we not say that needs to be said?
What I think needs to be said, that if we are serious about addressing the matter itself of gun violence in America, I think we need to address the fact that actually all of us here on the stage are in agreement. We need to do something to reduce it.
We're talking about gun violence, gun homicides. You've got to look at where the problem is in those 2 to 5% of the counties in the United States, not in places like Utah where guns are free and easy access, yet we have a very low crime rate. Your biggest bang for the buck is going to be addressing those cultural concerns in those counties.
Okay, we have 20 seconds left. Representative Ray?
We need to unite. The problem is we're being told by activist groups that we need to rage and go out and show our dissatisfaction. The fact is we need to come together and we need to sit down and work this out.
All right, you've got 10 seconds, Representative King.
Let's do a better job getting guns out of the hands of people who have shown that they can't be trusted with guns. People who have been convicted of domestic violence. People who have been shown to have suicidal ideation and harm themselves, at risk of harming themselves.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us for this special report. We in the Fox 13 newsroom just believe that this conversation is important. We're glad that you are a part of it.